The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HistoryThings to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
Alright everybody, welcome to the final installment of the History Things podcast field video exclusive sponsored by TR Historical. We want to thank them for sponsoring the show today. Make sure that you go to trhistorical.com, enter the promo code HistoryThings from now until the end of February to get 10% off your next purchase. They are your one-stop shop for all your history fan gear needs, shirts, magnets, other swag like that. Make sure you check out trhistorical.com. We're here at the National Cemetery. We're here to wrap up the story. It's been an awesomely long day. We've covered a ton of ground, a ton of material. To make yet another Gettysburg joke, we've covered some very good ground.
Very good ground.
Because we just can't stop quoting bad Civil War movies every time we do one of these. So let's just keep it going. But no, we're here to wrap the story. And if you've been following along, today we have covered material that starts roughly around the end of October of 1862. Army's moving into the Loudoun Valley. We have a change of command. McClellan's out, Burnside is in. New plan, which is to come to Fredericksburg, utilize the railroad and things like that, and head to Richmond. A march is stolen. Bobby Lee is caught, quote, with his pants down. Burnside gets here way in advance of Robert E. Lee, except we have typical Washington logistical hiccups. Pontoons don't make it down here. A lot of time is lost. Lee's able to get down here. Things are starting to equalize, and then the river crossing is made. One of the first beachheads in U.S. military history is established right here in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Union troops crossing the Rappahannock. Street fighting ensues once the federal troops get that toehold, right? They start to fight their way up into the town of Fredericksburg, clearing out staunch defense from Mississippi boys under Barksdale's command. Guys who really aren't even supposed to be there at that point. Supposed to fold initially, instead doing a really effective fighting retreat out of the city, and it takes time. It slows down the federal advance. We have some steam blow off. Federal boys that have now occupied Fredericksburg, this symbol of the Confederacy, again, attached to both George Washington imagery and Robert E. Lee's imagery and things like that. This Confederate hub, significant hub, is now in the hands of Union defenders. They start to loot, they start to vandalize, break things apart, start to take home some souvenirs as best they can. Marcena Patrick, who you see in the Gods and Generals movie, kind of corrals the thing real quickly, and then the rest of the time before the December 13th charges is a logistical day. Everybody's sort of settling in and getting ready for the fight they know is coming. December 13th, we have a single gun. John Pelham is going to cause a whole lot of headaches for the federal forces. It's going to kind of stall everything for a couple hours before things get moving. And then we start to see a combination of almost two different fights happening along sort of the same front on Marie's Heights. We have the action over at Prospect Hill, the slaughter farm, where we have a pretty equal fight as far as damage and casualties sustained. One of the biggest what-ifs of the American Civil War. Absolutely. The Pennsylvania Reserves, they break through the lines that Jackson has sort of let them break through with this hole and things like that. Where in the world is John Reynolds? He's not around. Today we've had some fun. We've met some of our friends out here on the field. We actually ran into Frank O'Reilly right before we shot the Slaughter Pen live stream. And, you know, he's one of the authoritative voices on this Battle of Fredericksburg. And he unequivocally said John Reynolds completely abdicated his command when he was hanging out. It was a magnificent abdication. So there's that. We also ran into Jim Cobb out here, who's obviously, if you know your First World War guys, he worked with the War Graves Commission and things. And actually, he's out here today working for Will Eichler and the Civil War Digital Digest guys. So shout out to all you out there. The where were we? We were talking about
The fight itself.
The fight itself. We're getting to these charges here. So Prospect Hill, right? We have a hole that's been breached by Pennsylvanians. One of the biggest what-ifs, like I was saying, right? And even casualties.
Not the case here at Willis Hill.
Right, 5,000 or so casualties on the federal side to roughly 4,000 on the Confederate side, and then we came over here to Willis Hill where things were a lot different, a lot more one-sided. We had a bunch of very futile, you could say, Union assaults against a very well-defended Confederate position here behind a stone wall. But one thing before we wrap up for the day that I do like to point out, we kind of alluded to it, was just the kind of damage that actually took place along that stone wall. It wasn't strictly just a bloodbath in the sense that Confederate musketry was cutting down Union soldiers. I do like to point out that the Union soldiers that were making these ill-fated assaults were giving pretty good, almost as good as they were getting in a sense. Because remember, Avery had said that the only way to get down to reinforce the Confederate position along the stone wall was to come down the open face of that slope you can see behind us in that shot, which absolutely left you completely exposed to small arms fire. So whether you are intentionally aiming or targeting those guys who are exposed coming down the hill, or if you're aiming at the guys on the wall and you're missing high, you are hitting somebody likely coming down that hill. So just want to, if you want a visual image of what that looked like, it wasn't just like a bunch of unwounded, really well like polished Confederates with a bunch of federal dead in front of them. There was just a sea of destruction around everybody, on the hill behind them, on the hill in front of them.
1,000 Confederate casualties is still 1,000 Confederate casualties. A lot of people that are killed or wounded in this area.
And number
80% in some cases. Some accounts put the 80 percentile of officers killed or wounded on the Confederate side of the sunken road out of those 1,000 casualties. What's also really important to remember is that Union artillery is also going to be sporadically falling throughout this area for the whole day. Even though they're long range from Stafford and they're not as accurate as they probably could have been or hoped to have been, you still have shells impacting around here. You have a lot of caissons getting hit and exploding as well. So even being back here on this hilltop with the artillery units of the Confederate First Corps, you're still going to be in danger. You're still going to have casualties back here. And so that's something to also remember, that there is no such thing as a perfect defensive position, especially if there's 1,000 Confederate casualties.
There was a lot more to Fredericksburg than just a bunch of ill-fated charges against the stone wall, and that we hope that if you took away anything from today's broadcast, it was just that there was so much more to this fight, and there were the consequences of this fight were so much bigger. Because remember, we talked about this at multiple times through the Maryland campaign video, the Loudon campaign video we made, or the 2nd Virginia campaign video rather, that we made, is that there's a political atmosphere, there's a political season going on here at this time, and midterms have played out. We're talking about the dawn of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Matt, tell us a little bit as we wrap up here about sort of what the consequences, what the aftermath of this Confederate victory were.
Well, Lincoln would actually say that if he is in a place worse than hell, that he is in it, after he got word of these tremendous casualties and the repulse, yet again, of the Army of the Potomac. Now, he would also describe the losses here as dreadful arithmetic, comparing the losses of the Federal forces versus those of the Confederates, and later stating that if they had a battle like this every day for a week, the Union Army would still be vast, and the Confederate Army would essentially cease to exist. But Avery kind of put that into context a little bit for us when in regards to the casualties and whatnot for this battle.
It's important to remember how percentages of different bodies of troops work. So overall, if you remember us at the beginning, we said about 120,000 Union soldiers start this campaign. After the battle on December 13th, total for the whole campaign, you have about 13,000 Union soldiers killed, captured, wounded, or missing during the days of combat here. And that's a small portion of that 120,000. You still have a pretty sizable force, not to mention you have an entire reserve Grand Division, the 11th and 12th Corps, that are not even here. They're up near Stafford during the entire time of the battle between Warrenton and Stafford for the most part. For the Confederates, on the other hand, that's 78,000. Now, they do take lesser casualties. They take 5,000 casualties for the whole battle. That's pretty darn good. But that's going to be the only time that the Confederate casualties really are that light, with the exception of the Battle of Cold Harbor in 1864. Now, with that in mind, you have to understand here that for Robert E. Lee, this is going to be hard to replace even with 5,000 losses, because a lot of them are officers. And that's going to come even worse during the battles of Chancellorsville and Gettysburg that follow. His officer corps is going to take heavy casualties in the coming campaigns, and that's going to start here at Fredericksburg. It had already begun, but it definitely starts to get cemented here as he's losing guys like T.R.R. Cobb, Maxcy Gregg, a lot of different names, to name a few, are basically falling and they're going to be out of commission for the rest of the campaign. Most importantly, not forget, the resources of these armies are drying up. The Army of the Potomac is going to be pretty well supplied throughout the winter, even though men are going to suffer. They're going to find lack of shoes, lack of adequate winter clothing. There's very inadequate diets passed around, but the Confederates are going to be in the same boat. And it's going to be twice as hard for them to replace their resources because Richmond's not sending them these supplies. They're foraging for themselves. At least DC is making an attempt to keep the Army of the Potomac supplied here. And so the winter months, even for the victor, is going to be very miserable for both armies here in the Rappahannock Valley. You're going to have the Union Army of the Potomac trying to regain the initiative. Burnside realizing that he has done a pretty big blunder here. Regardless of his intentions, regardless of his plan, it all kind of fell apart, as sometimes these things do.
Yeah.
And so on January 9th, 1863, a couple days after the new year's begun, the Emancipation Proclamation is now in effect. And even with this defeat here, it is still relatively well received. Also mostly thanks to the Union victory, I guess strategic victory at Stones River out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Yep.
And so with that in mind,
Grove, too.
yes. And so there are Union victories to help get the Emancipation Proclamation into effect. But Burnside wants to kind of get off on the good start of that. And on January 9th, he launches another campaign that's going to flank up north and around the Confederate defenses around Fredericksburg. But it does not even get off the ground. About 4 miles out, the army starts to bog down on the roads because it rains and it rains and it rains and it rains some more. And the roads are going to turn to muddy quagmires.
Mid-Atlantic.
There are going to be places where the mud is almost 6 feet deep in some places, according to some accounts.
That's very Passchendaele-like.
That's very Passchendaele-like. Horses drown in the mud on this mud march. It's miserable. And the Confederates seeing this, they're going to taunt the Union forces the whole time. It's miserable. By January 10th, or not the 10th, by January, I believe, 15th, most of the Union Army has returned to its camps, and they go into official winter camp for the rest of the season. And this is just miserable. The men are disheartened. They're openly cursing Burnside. You're going to see almost 20,000 desertions, 20,000 AWOLs in the month of January 1863 alone from the Union Army of the Potomac. Should also be noted, Confederates are also deserting because these guys are starving and they can't feed themselves. And so you have instances of Confederates leaving the Confederate Army in droves, but if they're caught, especially in the case of Jackson's Corps, Jackson orders these men shot if he finds anyone leaving the army. And so with the case of the Union Army, you're going to have a course correction. Ambrose Burnside, he's going to offer his resignation on January 27th. He will be replaced with Joseph Hooker, his nemesis. When Hooker takes over, he is going to revamp this army. He's going to feed them. He's going to clothe them, properly equip them, pay them.
He basically says to the deserters, if you come back, we just won't talk about it.
Yeah,
just come back
basically,
to service.
he does it in a very creative way. He says, if you come, all units that are enlistments are up in at the end of spring, basically at the end of May, you can only go home if you're at 95% strength. And so all these guys who knew the guys who ran off are writing, get back here so we can all go home together.
Yeah.
But also, Hooker did offer amnesty to all deserters who left the army, realizing this was a very sensitive topic, a very sensitive period. So by April 2nd, the Union Army's ranks are going to swell back to its original size. So this battle, even though it's considered the worst defeat for the Army of the Potomac, it does not destroy this army. It doesn't even really, in a sense, defeat this army.
No, but it does require a hard reset button over the winter.
The Army of the Potomac will change drastically. This will not be the same army after this battle, because after Fredericksburg, it is extremely, that's cool. Hawk and Crows are battling as we speak. So basically what's happening after Fredericksburg is this is becoming a very personal conflict, especially for the officers. George Gordon Meade was quoted as saying, if he could get one more good licking into the Rebs before the contest was decided, he did not care the outcome. He just wants one more opportunity to pummel the Confederates, give them the punishment that the Union received here at Fredericksburg. And ironically enough, that's going to come a couple months later at Gettysburg,
where they are chanting literally this battle's name over their own stone wall up there
on Cemetery Ridge. The same Union 2nd Corps that had made these assaults is going to be facing the same Confederate 1st Corps. And they are going to pummel these guys back into submission, back into Seminary Ridge, and they will begin to chant Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg. So for a battle that gets glossed over as an important battle, it absolutely has incredible significance in the larger scheme of things.
Stayed with Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers throughout the end of the war, and obviously for years after that. Matt, take us to the end of the show here, big guy.
I just wanted to reiterate what Avery was saying by wrapping things up with a quote from Lee himself regarding this fight. Considered one of his greatest victories of the war, and certainly his most one-sided victory, Lee would actually write, "At Fredericksburg, we gained a battle, inflicting very severe loss on the enemy in men and materiel. Our people were greatly elated. I was much depressed. We had really accomplished nothing. We had not gained a foot of ground, and I knew the enemy could easily replace the men he had lost," as the guys were just saying. "And the loss of materials was, if anything, rather beneficial to him, as it gave the opportunity for the contractors to make more money." Now, of course, there's a little cynicism there on Lee's part, but he is looking at the reality of the situation. The Army of the Potomac, the Union effort as a whole, is able to rearm and reman itself much easier than the Confederates will ever be able to do. And Lee, even after a significant victory here on the banks of the Rappahannock, knows what's coming.
You could make the case that he sees the writing on the wall for the totality of the war as to how it will go. So just to say a few things before we get out of here, we thank you all for following along with us. We know it's been a long day. For you guys, it's definitely been a long day for us, but it's been awesome, man. It's been absolutely great. We got to cover some of the more unknown, and we got to cover some of the more really well-known parts of this battle to tell a fuller, more complete story than we're used to doing in the past. So we thank you for hanging out with us for that. We want to thank Dave and everybody over at TR Historical for sponsoring this live stream here. It's very cool of those guys to reach out and do that. So we hope that you enjoyed the program that we put together for everyone here. So make sure you get on over to trhistorical.com, and again, use our promo code HistoryThings to get yourself 10% off some really cool history swag. And then lastly, I want to say thanks to Avery Lentz for spending a Sunday hanging out with us. We are live on the actual battle anniversary date of these charges we were talking about here at Maurice Heights. And Avery drove down to come hang out with us, so thanks for that, big guy.
Thanks
And
for
a big
inviting me.
thank you to our crew today as well.
Parker.
Mr. Parker Russell's here. He's our director of sorts. We're going to let him stick his head in the shot here.
Those of you who listen to the History Things podcast, if you want to put a face to a name here, Parker Russell was our guest on episode 3. He was our White Star Line storyteller, so we wanted to say thanks and get him out here so y'all can say hey. So thanks, big guy, for coming out here and working the cameras for us today. And then, so Avery, before we get out of here, tell everyone where they can follow along with you and all the awesomeness that is Battles and Banter podcast.
Absolutely. So Battles and Banters, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On Twitter, we are at Battles Podcast. You can find us best by typing in Battles and Banter on Instagram or Facebook. You can find us on all major listening platforms like iTunes, Spotify, Google Playlists, or Google whatever. Just find us on Google. And definitely tune in. We got a couple episodes featuring Pat coming up. Hopefully we'll be doing some episodes featuring Matt as well. We got some Lord of the Rings stuff I hope to get back into the slot. So we got a lot of exciting things coming up. But that's 2021 looking forward. New year, baby, new year. So that's all I got with that.
Well, for the History Things podcast coming up for us, we have a new episode coming out, our final episode of season 1 coming out this Wednesday, our end of the year wrap up, where we kind of take a look back at what not just the show's year has been like, but what our year has been like. Obviously, we've had a historic election season. We had a pandemic that we're still living through.
Social upheavals.
I bought a house. Matt fought wildfires. Like, we had a ton of stuff happen in 2021. So you want to check that out. That comes out Wednesday, December 16th. And then we're right back at it on January 1st.
That's right.
Quarter 1 of season 2 for us comes out, where we hung out with Ben Frail from the Sons of Union Veterans. Sorry, words are hard, like we've said 1,000 times today. And yeah, that's it. So make sure you check out the History Things podcast on all major platforms as well, just like he was saying. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, ask your Amazon Alexa app, and all that cool stuff. You can follow us on Instagram at the History Things podcast. You can follow Matt on Instagram at Matt Borders Books, me at History Things with Pat on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or send us an email at thehistorythings@gmail.com. For my guest Avery Lentz, for my host, Matt Borders, I'm your host, Pat McGuire, saying this has been the History Things podcast, field video exclusive, Battle of Fredericksburg, sponsored by TR Historical. Thank you all, and we will see you in 2021. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Good night.
Peace out.